Hello and welcome to Doorstep History. This is the first of two special programs in which we will be commemorating the centenary of the devastating Zeppelin raids on the Black Country. There were 103 dates on which Zeppelins bombed the country. These were mainly along the east coast and London. The first bomb to be dropped from a Zeppelin which caused damage occurred not in a heavily populated urban city, but in the North Norfolk settlement of Sheringham in January 1915. Everyone knew that the coastline was vulnerable to Zeppelin attacks. Norwich was the major population centre, but that was inland. The Zeppelins kept to the coast. And that January night, two Zeppelins came across the North Sea looking for Humberside. They either got lost or mechanical faults or whatever meant they didn't quite get there. Instead, they reached the North Norfolk coast. One of them dropped its bomb on Sheringham. It does say it's the first bomb to be dropped on Britain in World War I. Technically that should say the first bomb dropped from a Zeppelin in World War I, because the first bomb actually fell in Dover on Christmas Eve 1914 and it was dropped from an aeroplane. This here is the first one where damage was caused by a Zeppelin. It was said to have fallen straight through the roof and into the kitchen. A girl who was in that kitchen reportedly fell off her chair in fright. Someone in the house was said to have picked up the bomb, taken it outside and put it in a bucket of water, or a horse trough, depending on which source of information you believe. From Sheringham it moved along the coast and fatalities occurred at King's Lynn. But in the meantime, the other Zeppelin had moved down and circled the Great Yarmouth area. It was there that the first casualty from a Zeppelin occurred. A plaque marks the location of the house where Martha Taylor and Samuel Smith lived. They were killed on the 19th of January 1915, the first fatalities from a Zeppelin bomb. This is the cemetery at Great Yarmouth Minster, which is where Samuel Smith was buried. He's buried in the same grave as his brother. It says simply, he was killed by a bomb from a Zeppelin. The burial for Samuel Smith was quite low-key. The government didn't want to get much publicity for what had happened. The Mayor of the Borough of Great Yarmouth laid a wreath here on the 19th of January 2015 to mark the centenary of the raid. In the autumn of 1915, strange vessels of war, swimming like sharks, were seen in the skies over London. On the 8th of September, this building in central London was destroyed in a Zeppelin raid. And in this building on Farringdon in central London is this huge white plaque, one of the most visible signs of evidence of Zeppelin activity. After the bombing, the building was reconstructed and it was given the name Zeppelin Building, and it still bears that name today. As early as late 1914, letter writers to the press complained that not enough was being planned in Birmingham to defend the city from attacks. A newspaper editor replied that our correspondents may rest assured that the authorities have not lost sight of such a contingency, remote as it is. Birmingham's inland position is greatly against a raid. In November 1914, the Chief Constable, C.H. Rafter, issued orders under the Defence of the Realm Act. The use of external lights for advertising purposes was banned. All street lamps were to be shaded. All skylights were to be covered at night. And lighting levels in trams and buses was reduced. This served the double purpose of hiding the city from hostile attackers and saving fuel. Predictably, the order was subjected to much criticism by those who claimed that it was depressing people and it was causing road accidents. After the Great Yarmouth incident, further orders were issued by Mr. Rafter, and he announced that if the city was attacked, certain factory whistles and hooters would be used as sirens. But as New Year 1916 arrived, so did a stark warning from Count Zeppelin. He announced, "The flower of our manhood has been called upon to make bitter sacrifices, and our women's folk mourn the loss of their dear ones. Our consolation is that victory is in sight, and the final destruction of our enemies will be swift and sudden. Our Zeppelin fleets will play an important part in future operations and will demonstrate more than ever their power as a factor in modern warfare." Later that month, Birmingham came under even stricter lighting conditions, and within a week, the first case of contravention of the lighting order was heard at the Victoria Law Courts. The defendant was Charles Mantill of Crego Street in Lee Bank, who ran a chemist shop which was at the junction of 6 roads. He said, "I will darken my windows when the Zeppelins come." The court said it was not carelessness on his part, but it was open defiance. Mantill said he'd meant the remark to be jocular, but it was misplaced and he was sorry for it. But the court fined him £3. In February 1916, the government issued instructions to homeowners what to do if they were caught up in a raid. People should get indoors and stay there. Keep away from windows. Have a supply of water to put out incendiary bombs, and never touch an unexploded bomb. People were also told to keep cool, as excitement and thoughtlessness are as bad as fright. School children were pictured receiving instruction at school about what to do in case of an emergency. The well-dressed schoolmaster informed the children, "Remember, British means pluck." That British pluck was tested across the West Midlands when Zeppelins ventured inland on the night of the 31st of January 1916. It's thought they were heading for Merseyside, but got hopelessly lost. Across much of the country, blackout precautions were effective, but the Black Country was different.
We're so far inland that no air raid precautions were taken, purely and simply because of the distance. At the time, technology, they wouldn't have thought that Zeppelins would have reached us.
That complacency led to deaths and destruction across the Black Country. We're outside the Nissa Local, which is the supermarket these days, but the site's got historical significance, hasn't it, Derek?
It is. That was the site of the Tivoli cinema.
On hearing the Zeppelin bombs fall, the anxious locals left the cinema in a hurry. One man, Thomas Morris, ran the short distance to Union Street where he lived, and he was confronted with a scene of devastation.
Where that blue car had just come round the corner conveniently, the white porches, that would be the site of where the Morris and Greensill family were killed.
Tragically, this was the scene of the worst single loss of life. 5 members of Thomas's family were killed, including an 8-year-old girl called Nellie and her 11-year-old brother Martin. The officially sanctioned photographs made headline news, although the exact location was kept secret by the censors. The absence of names and places and persons is in accordance with official instructions, and our readers will see that this regulation is desirable to prevent the enemy knowing his precise whereabouts.
Just in front of us here would be a big bomb crater when L21 dropped its second load. The walkway was the Lockside Canal site, and the space would be where the victims were killed in their homes. The Conservative Club, where some of the victims were laying on the steps.
Other bombs fell across the area, causing damage but not deaths.
The L21 came this direction. He dropped the bomb here just as a train had come in from Birmingham. and a gentleman wrote a first-hand account of it, which is very informative, saying that the train was damaged and that the site was roughly in this vicinity here. Can't be 100% accurate, but within 20 feet we're near enough. He then travelled up the canal and dropped bombs on the permanent way, and then carried on to Broomfield and then on to Braidley. There was a signal box. Originally the road ran through here, and it was notorious for the level crossings. You could wait anything up to an hour to get through. This is the main coastline track.
In part 2 of Doorstep History, we will be finding out what happened when the Zeppelins moved across Wednesbury. Now moved along the canal and we're at Braidley, and there's this impressive plaque on the wall, and it's for 2 people who were killed at this spot on the canal bank on that fateful night in 1916. And once again, here's Ian to tell us all about it.
Maud Fellows, a domestic servant, aged 23, and her boyfriend, of no particular relation, William Fellows, aged 24, were walking along this towpath alongside the canal water pumping station, and a bomb fell on the towpath 8 feet in front of them. Walter Spilsbury, who was working at the Britannia Ironworks, thought it was a boiler explosion. He ran out onto the towpath, supposedly for safety, and looked up, and L21 was hovering above. He heard desperate cries from Maud and arrived at the scene. He recognised the couple as friends. Sadly, William had been virtually decapitated. Maud was carried, mortally wounded, to the nearby Bush Inn, and then eventually to Wolverhampton Hospital. Now there was a break of quite a few hours before she received medical attention. Now, until this plaque was unveiled by the late Dennis Turner in 1994, it was rather ominously marked, the site, with an X marks the spot, scratched into a brick, and a crucifix. And if you look around as well, you see the shrapnel holes. But notably, we find that William has strangely become Frederick on the plaque. So again, it points out the need to look at contemporary records, and I found the name William on his death certificate, so we know that is the real McCoy. His name was William Fellows.
The area of Wednesbury, which is now home to the leisure centre, was the site of James Russell's Crown Tube Works, and this was the next place to receive attention from the Zeppelins. The huge tube works was almost empty of workers at the time, as they were on strike in a dispute over working hours. It was the Zeppelin that was to strike next. Zeppelin Captain Max Dietrich, who was uncle to 14-year-old Marlene, ordered bombs to be dropped which wrecked the inside of the building. Much of it remained derelict until the early 1960s. The area has since been redeveloped twice, and now once again much of it lies derelict. Opposite to it, where there is a modern housing estate, there was once the King Street residential area.
Here in King Street there were 13 victims on that night. Many different circumstances, different ages. One 21-year-old was on his way home from work, and he was actually calling in on his girlfriend in King Street. His cries for help were heard, and her parents emerged from the cellar where they'd sought refuge, and they took him down the cellar and tended to him for as much as they could do, and sadly he expired from awful gaping wounds, the bomb having exploded directly in front of him here in the street. The Zeppelin bombs weren't aimed very well, and King Street being so close to the Crown Tube Works, a few stray bombs actually landed on this residential district. The catalyst of the explosions was centred upon numbers 12, 13 and 14 King Street.
So this is the newspaper of the time, the Daily Sketch, which is a national paper. So this Zeppelin Raid actually made national headlines, and this is the paper from the 10th of February 1916.
And I've identified these as the Smith family, starting with Grandma Mary Emma Evans, age 57. There's Joseph Horton Smith, the father, who was from number 14 King Street. Grandma from Highbullen was visiting, and the 3 children were killed. Underneath all the debris at the centre where number 13 King Street would have stood were found the bodies of the Smith family and Grandma, the 2 bodies of the Shiltons who lived at number 13, and also 10-year-old Matilda May Burt from nearby Dale Street, and she had been little Ina's playmate. Eyewitnesses at first thought there had been a boiler explosion at the Crown Tube Works, and they told of seeing blue flames arising from the sites of the explosions. They couldn't see the airship, but they could distinctly hear the whirring of its engines. Those that arrived in King Street found a scene of absolute carnage. Bodies strewn all over the road. One woman, Susan Howells, at number 12, had been blown through the front wall, and her body was found on the opposite side of the road. And there were body parts scattered all over the place. At the sites of number 12 to 14, beneath the rubble of number 13, were found 7 bodies. They were eventually scraped up, put in boxes, and numbered at the local undertakers.
We've moved across town now, and we're outside what was a school in 1916, and one of the pupils here, John Flaherty, actually wrote about the Zeppelin as an essay for one of his school lessons, didn't he?
He did. I'm standing in front of the former St Mary's Junior School, and I've actually got John Flaherty's composition here, and I'll read it to you. When the Germans began to raid England with Zeppelins, many people said they could not reach the Midlands. On the 31st of January 1916, the Germans raided Wednesbury in their airships. They came at 8 o'clock at night. I was in the house when they dropped the bombs. I thought it was an earthquake at first, but my father said it was an airship. The first lasted about 10 minutes. When the second lot dropped, I went into the cellar. It shook our windows very much. The most damage was done in King Street because there is a big works there. Many people were injured and some killed. Houses were blown down. They blew up some of the factory in King Street. When I went up on Tuesday morning to see the damage, I saw a child's foot. On the High Bullen, 3 public houses were damaged. At the back of the Crown and Cushion, a big hole was made by a bomb. Now this is Wednesbury legend. The licensee of the Crown and Cushion kept penned foul, and when he went to check on them the following morning, he had a pen full of ready roasters.
As the anachists of the air, as they were called, moved towards Walsall, the Congregational Church on Wednesbury Road was hit and severely damaged. A local man, Thomas Merrilees, was hit by flying debris and died from injuries inflicted by the nocturnal murderers. The L21 continued over the town, dropping a number of bombs. One dropped in the grounds of Walsall and District Cottage Hospital. It was there that P.C. Burrell found that an incendiary bomb had ignited wood near to a ward. He managed to extinguish the flames and was later presented with a silver medal in recognition of his heroic deeds. The last explosive fell in the centre of Walsall, outside the Science and Art Institute in Bradford Place. It killed 3 people. One of the victims was the Lady Mayoress of Walsall, 55-year-old May Julia Slater. She was a passenger on a passing tram. She was rushed to hospital with severe wounds to the chest and abdomen, but she was wounded so badly that she died on the 20th of February of shock and septicemia. Fittingly, the town's war memorial now stands on the spot where the tram was hit. The local press, although not identifying the towns concerned, printed photographs which amazed the population and attracted people to the area to see for themselves what had happened. The scene of the devastation was almost a tourist attraction, wasn't it?
It was. People who today you probably regard as ghouls turned up in their thousands, the press reported. They turned up in charabancs and wagonettes. And behind me, where we've got the very busy High Bullen today, they were all parked all alongside each other in close proximity, that the press said it resembled Epsom on Derby Day, or otherwise Hampstead Heath on the bank holiday. But there were also warnings in the press of pickpockets at work amongst the crowds. Now, they would sell postcards of the bombs and of the bomb damage to these tourists that they actually were, and there'd be the Boy Scouts standing there with tins, the VTC volunteers, they would be holding caps, all collecting money. So these people were very welcome.
In next week's Doorstep History, we'll be featuring the impressive events which have been held to mark the centenary of the night the Zeppelins brought the war to the doorsteps of the West Midlands.